Welcome again, everyone. We're here, eighth and final session, and really the last session of the whole module series, except for the panel discussion, which will sort of wrap this up. That'll be September 14th, Tuesday. So thank you all who's been here from the start or jumping in and out. It's been really great having you all here interacting, geeking out on grammar. Or that could be the name of this. And going forward, actually geeking out with grandpa. So this is normally the point where I announce future sessions, but with this being the last one, I thought I can give a moment to sort of shout out another program we just announced yesterday. People are nodding. That means you're following us on social media. So let me just share my screen really quickly. If you heard, it's the Adult Christian Education Program, and this is a program that will run for 12 weeks from September 21 to December 14th, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. And it will be topics concerning all aspects of adult Christian life, liturgical or scripture, marriage, everything you can think of. And so if you just go right on our website and just this first button right here, it'll bring you to the program page, and there's a full list of every session that's going to come and a description of it. So highly encourage you to come register. There's about 1 million register buttons, but they all point to the same link. So you just got to register once. But yeah, I'm really excited about this. So once this is over, once we do the panel discussion on the 14th, after that, we'll jump right into this for 12 weeks and more education and a lot of familiar names you'll see here. Dr. Irvin is in the last two sessions as well, and Bishop Daniel will kick it off. So that's that. And so now I'd like to introduce our presenter for the day, and that's Deacon Ezras Tellalian, a graduate of St. Narcissus Armenian Seminary, where he studied Grapar under Dr. Irvin and Dr. Ed Matthews. He currently teaches at Laramie County Community College in Wyoming, while he's finishing his PhD in cognitive, social, and developmental psychology at the New School for Social Research. So Ezra, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Vartan. And thanks to Jesse first for inviting me to do this. And it's just been a pleasure to tune in when I've been able to and continue to be with all of you, especially the familiar faces from Grapar and Kini. So good evening, good morning. Hope that you're doing well. So tonight, we're going to be discussing an upcoming feast in the Armenian Church. We celebrate this feast as one of the 5 major feasts of the Church on the Sunday closest to September 14th. This is one of those kind of fixed, kind of movable feasts. You might know that we do this with the Assumption of St. Mary as well, celebrating it on the Sunday closest to August 15th. So we have some of these feasts like this in our liturgical calendar. So this year we'll be celebrating it a couple days before the 14th on the 12th. So that's coming up in a couple Sundays, and I thought, well, this is a series on hope. We're entering the season of the cross, where we have several feasts of the cross coming up in September and October. So why not do a sharagan? These hymns are near and dear to my heart, and I hope after this evening they will haunt you as well in a very good way. So just to sort of orient those of you who may not be familiar with the Sharag notes to this book, orient you to this book. It's a mess if you're coming into it with a Western perspective and thinking that it's going to be organized in a way that is easily approachable for someone who is not completely immersed in the Armenian liturgical experience. But this is one of those books that as one enters into the life of the Church more fully, it becomes more a part of one's soul, even because we're seeing these things we're translating these written words into not only spoken word, but attaching these melodies to them. It's combining our voices together in unison in praise of God. This is what this book does. It's massive if you haven't seen it. I guess with the screen it's not working very well, but it's a very large book. And we'll zoom in, don't worry. You won't have to read it from here. And just a little bit about this particular sharagan. I'm not going to go too deeply into the different types of sharagans that we have, but this is a particular category or family of hymn that is situated within the Gisherayim genre. So it's within the night service of the church. And there are three parts of the service. The first part is probably what a lot of us may be familiar with, that has the Aravot du Sol, the Zartutziaks, and so on, as part of the daily service. There's a middle chunk that focuses on those that have fallen asleep. So there's a psalm, a gospel reading. This is where Kahanaik or Zohoviat, these hymns, if you're familiar with them, we get them from St. Nessus. This is where they're situated liturgically. And then we do a prayer for the dead, and all of this that we do as a Hokehanki service. This is actually where one of the places this Hokehanki service comes up. Right after that, there's a Haimer, and then we sing this Orphanetun Sharagan, which is based on a verse from Exodus. So we can look at, let's see, I can share this over here. We can look at Exodus 15. And this is, just to contextualize this is when the Hebrews are passing through the Red Sea. And Moses is going to begin his song of praise. So yes, Moses begins singing along with the sons of Israel to God. He's saying, sing this to God. Praise the Lord, for in his glory he is glorified, and so on. And it goes on to tell the story of how the soldiers were smothered in the waves, and the Hebrews were allowed to pass by safely. So this is where this sharagan, the Orfnet Suk Azer, Ziparoke Paravorial. This is an incipit. This is the beginning of the sharagan, and it comes with different melodies with different tones. So all that to say, in our tonal system also here, we have 8 tones, and this one begins with the first tone. So here we are in the morning service, or the night service rather, and we're recounting Moses' song, the Hebrews going through the Red Sea. And now we're coming to the cross, the time of the year where we're going to sing about the cross. This is like a theologian, sharagan writer's paradise. This is where they can really start to flourish and combine all sorts of things because, well, we'll see. Gotta hold in my enthusiasm a little bit here, not get ahead of myself. So here is the whole sharagan. It starts here. The orf, you'll see this closer, but it says orf to indicate the Orphanetun sharagan. And we'll be looking at these 4 verses first, and then it continues with some other verses, and then there are themed chunks, let's call them, for Harutian, Hokekalistian, and now I'm having trouble reading it, Hankistian. And then there's also a whole family of hymns dedicated to the Mother of God. And I want to emphasize here with ads for Asvad Zazim, we have a lot of different good job, so a lot of these abbreviations here. So Asvad Zazim here. So this is actually we're singing to God in these other verses. But always when we get to this particular family, we start singing to Saint Mary. We address her in the second person. So you were sufficient to receive in your womb the word of God. You did this. We're glorifying you. We're magnifying you. We're turning her words, the Magnificat, on its head, and we're magnifying her. And I just wanted to emphasize this, that we're asking for her intercessions in a very important place, in a very visceral way here. You did this. And then we get to these final two verses of any Charagan, unless the Parkor and Aishmiev Nisht are combined. What you'll see is in the penultimate verse, you'll have a Parkor that's sung with a particular melody specific to the tone, and then an Aishmiev Nisht Avidan Savidanis Amen, also sung to the same tone. So we're going to be looking at these four verses here that begin the hymn. And usually what we do is, because the style of the hymn will change from a more melismatic, drawn out hymn to what we call chapavor, or more metered hymn. What we usually do is sing one of these last verses. Sarkis, I'm looking at you. We sing one of these last verses from the chunk dedicated to Mary, and then we'll do Parkor, because it provides really this very nice shift into this chapavor, this more metered melody from the more melismatic. But Armenian hymn writers got even more creative with this and messed with the structure. So it's going to be one super melismatic, more melismatic than usual first verse. And then we're going to have these next three are going to be chapavor. You'll hear the shift. And then with Ararich Astvaz, this will continue to be in the chapavor, and then it slows down for the Musankam. I'm going to be playing for you the Akin Ensemble from Paris. So this is a very famous group that is dedicated to traditional Armenian chant in the traditional style. So Adam and Virginie Kerofian are the leaders of this, and he's been working for years with this ensemble that he's created. Really trying and sometimes even struggling to put this all back together. So here I will just back off and let you hear the Akin Ensemble with a translation of Bishop Daniel's juxtaposed here. Picks up with the chapavor here.
աշխարհագեցույց փազգադարածություն խաչի քո Քրիստոս աստված կավազան զորության յեդուր մեզ սովավզգյանս մեր վախյա
Որս մեր յալնի ջաշակ մանե փայդին հանցանած գենած փայդի վնգենա կորձեցեր սովավզգյանս մեր բահյա
Սուրբ խաչն օգնական հավատացելոց կանգնեցավ երկրի հաղթող թշնամուն եկայք ժողովուրդ երկրվակ Եսու
Արարիչն աստված պարշացավի խաչին ես մերյալս մեղոք պայրին ջաշակմամբ իսման օրոքյալ գենթանացույց
It slows down for this last verse. Feels nice just to let it sit, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but the power of monophonic music to me is this is an immense gift to us that and I think we've lost the tradition to the detriment of our souls. Really, this stuff gets in me, and it's so hard not to sing along with them. But I think that the power is evident, even if you don't understand what they're singing. There's something to this whole system of music that is very powerful. And anyway, we'll talk more about music maybe some other time. But let's get into the text itself. I want to sort of open it up now that I've contextualized the Sharagan, where this appears within the liturgical calendar, where it appears within the liturgical cycle of hours as well. Right after this, we shift into singing Parki Partsuns, Glory to God in the highest, recounting Luke 2, just with a little interlude. The deacon gives the purvar and then censes around the church. We sing Parki Partsuns, and then there's a hymn and some other things afterward in this third chunk. So I want to open it up to you. What sort of things, let's just go through stanza by stanza or dun by dun. Each one of these sections is called a dun. What is it that stands out to you? It can be also within the text that you see to the left. We can talk about some of the chaz if you're interested. But what stands out to you? I want to open it up. Maybe somebody can read it first. This first verse. Would somebody volunteer?
I'll read if no one's going to volunteer.
Okay, and would you prefer it like this, or cleaner like this?
I don't know. Either way is fine. I mean, the first way from the book, it's Vorzanarad Pazugas ko I խաչին դարածեցեր Քրիստոս Աստված եւ նշան հաղթության յետուր մեզ սովավ զգյանս մեր բահյա.
So first thing to note are these vors. There are a lot of vors and eyesores in the Sharag notes. That might have been a bad joke, forgive me, but the vor really refers to a person. It can be, oh, you who did such and such. That's its function here. Oh, you who did such and such. So, oh, Christ God being the person to whom we're speaking right here, Christos Astavads, right? So we're talking to somebody whenever we say vor. We're talking about somebody and to somebody when we say vor. So I want to also, like, what do you notice about the text itself and how it's written out? We've seen some other manuscripts where things are really, really abbreviated. What stands out to you about this?
A lot of the uts are written in there when they aren't really in the words. You see that in the Jamakir too.
Absolutely. So in these liturgical texts that are intended to be read out loud, I'm not supposed to sit here with my Jamakir and read it in my head. It's supposed to be said out loud. Even when I'm alone, there's power in prayer being spoken out loud. Our fathers understand this. So yes, we have a lot of these extra, yes, Boren.
Anurag means immaculate. Spotless is close, but not exact translation.
I wish the bishop could have joined us. But yes,
actually,
immaculate is definitely within that semantic range. Mm-hmm.
But the on is not, and the rod is spot, no spot. So that is more of a technical definition or more literate. No spot on rod.
Yes, spotless, and the immaculate, the im privative, also serves that function of being less, right? The spotless is taking it away, right? So these are that's definitely another option.
One of the things about the text that's nice is there are no abbreviations so far, and when there are hyphens at the end of the line when they carry on to, and there's nice spacing between the words too. So those are very nice things to see in this.
I was just going to say, like, all the words are separated, and sometimes it looks like one big run-on paragraph.
Yeah, and so this book, if you can picture it, if you haven't seen this in person, trying to describe it is somewhat difficult. But imagine a gurakas, imagine a lectern, and a bunch of guys usually, standing around it, kind of stacked in two columns, and you have somebody in the middle, the Zohrab, who would be sort of directing and leading the singing. This would be the most, the one with the best voice, most musical training, and so on. And so the Zohrab would be leading these guys that are looking at this one book. You know, these books are so expensive to reproduce. You've got this one big text. It's got to be large enough to see from a distance as well. So if you don't have good eyesight, that's another way to get cut out of seminary very easily as well. You're not going to make it in if you can't see what you're supposed to sing.
Yes, I had a question about the, the schwa sounds that are put in there, like astavads, for instance. Now that presumes a certain melody. In other words, a certain meter, rather. In other words, that you're going to be saying astavads instead of astavads or uzgyanus. So was the melody for this already set when they would have written this out like this? You see what I mean? In other words, because weren't some of these things had different melodies, you can kind of tell in some sense because the melody breaks up the words or the sentences in odd ways. I mean, I've noticed that in some other things. Whereas here, the uzgyanus and the astavads kind of assumes a certain meter. You see what I mean?
Absolutely, and in many cases, this is actually the intent of adding that extra syllable. That's the ultimate function. You're adding a syllable to make up for something that when it needs to conform to a certain meter. If you think of these more, these are flexible systems of music. So you might have more syllables in this first clause, and then if we count them all for that might be a different number of syllables. I'm not sure. I don't need to count, but I can sing them based on what's here. And it's a similar melody. So I'm singing it very quickly. Or I can sing it like this, right? And so on, right? You can do it this way. And so it helps with the metering, but in this case, really, a lot of these are written out and pronounced in order to be more clear. So you see Astavads, Nishan, just to make sure that it's clear that these letters are being enunciated. Gyanis, not as Gyansmesh, or we're not gonna shorten anything. If anything, we're drawing it out. Let's see, where else does it? Astavads again. So most of the time when you see Astavads, it's written out as Astavads. But
it's actually spelled differently. I mean, the Astavads, because they got rid of the vo altogether. In other words, they put a tune instead of a vohun, which I actually hadn't really thought about before.
So and my eyes so used to it, I don't see it anymore.
Right.
You're right. Yeah, Matt.
So adding that letter in there, changing I don't know my Armenian letter name, so it's changing from the O to the U. That's after the hewn, the W shifted from a W to a V. When did that take place? Because if this was written a long time ago, it would have been the OW, and it would have been pronounced differently. It would not have been pronounced.
It would have been Vo and Hewn. So it would have been this letter
and Astavads
instead of the ut here, right?
And pronounced Astavads.
So it'd just be Astavads. The U, when it comes, so this diphthong is usually U, or the U, let's see if we can find it, some pazu. This is usually U as a diphthong, these two letters together. But when it occurs in front of a vowel, it becomes a V. And I'll show you, let's see.
No, but Matt's question is originally when the spelling was established.
It was ow.
Yeah, it would have been oo, it would have been astuads, just the way the rat is actually an L. They didn't say Lukas in the 5th century, they said Lukas, and it changed over the centuries.
So this may have been so somewhere with that pronunciation of the hewn changed from a W to a V sometimes. And then so this was printed after that. So sometimes this Sharagon may have been written differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we also know certain changes in Greek too. Some letters, instead of ao, it's of, right? This instead of oi, it's e. It's just simplified to e. And the tendency in languages is to simplify, to have more open vowels and not to complicate things.
I mean,
you're pointing to the Mesrovian pronunciation. This is what you're worried when we kind of shift, which is a much larger discussion, and I am not qualified for that whatsoever, to be frank.
But the Sharagan could have been written in the Middle Ages, obvious. In other words, when the Vohun had already turned into a V sound. You see what I mean?
Yes, and so the spelling stays the same throughout, even if the pronunciation changes. So the spelling has only changed here because it's in the Sharag notes, because of that context. It's not because of anything in the language. It's not reflecting any sort of pronunciation shift. Does that make sense?
Well, the shift already happens, and now it's the spelling is reflecting the shift with the little.
No, the spelling is independent of the shift, is what I'm trying to say. The spelling also happens. It was there before as well.
No, but what he's saying, I think, is the hewn originally was a U, basically. because Wohun is OU in a sense.
I,
And like in German, it turns into a V sound, right? I mean, the W becomes a V. And so what he's saying is that the Hun now we just use as a V sound. But
sometimes.
yeah, but it wouldn't have been under Mesro, but I mean, this would have been written centuries after the alphabet was invented.
Yeah, and you'll see down here, further down, found an example of where the Hun shows up. So this is Paidivan, but instead of, there's also the option of reading it Paiduvan, right? So in order to make it, or Paidun, really.
Yeah.
Paidun. So this Ini Hun, or this little chaz up above it actually kind of indicates a sort of B sound. This V. This will show up above this combination oftentimes in order to clarify that. Too bad there isn't another, looking for another example of that.
Well, for instance, we say Ahotyuk somewhere when really, honestly, it's Ahotivk is what it should be. I mean, because it's Ahotk of, Ahotk Nerov is how you would say it in modern Armenian.
Yeah, there would be a debate about that, I'm sure.
I know.
Elisa, did you have a question?
I do, yes. I guess I'm curious as before we all pull out our crystal balls and try to read the minds of why these things were done. Who is the audience? As you mentioned, printing is expensive. Not everyone is literate. Not everyone's going to get a book. So is this meant for monastic use to teach the music, or monastic use to teach reading and pronunciation? So is that why the printings are the way they are?
It's printed the way it is for ease of singing. So it's laying it all out there, because when you're trying to sing with other people, we shouldn't be thinking, is it pazuks or is it pazugas? And you'll see this especially, it's especially important if an us or an un occurs just before a vowel, because then you need to know whether you're going to engage with the, if you're just going to have what is liaison. So the last consonant, just you lose the ut before it and it goes right into the vowel. So that's another case that we have to be careful of.
And is this coming from, was this an attempt to standardize a tradition? Because, so I'm reminded of modern day opera. So I studied French. I can understand French, but I go and see an opera in French, and boy, there are an awful lot more syllables than there are in the spoken word. So is the purpose of this to, like, okay, guys, this is how we all should do it. This is how, not just within a monastery or within a group of gentlemen singing, but like across churches? Was it an attempt at standardization, or like who said, this is how we're going to do it? Let's start printing it this way and go to town.
That is, so that's a much, much larger conversation than Gurapar in the Sharagan for today. What I will say is that there are multiple traditions of the Sharag notes. The printing itself, various printing locations, printing presses had their own agendas when they were printing, even down to the types of fonts that they would use. So this is a very nuanced discussion. And again, I'm not very qualified to do it. I have very cursory knowledge of this. But somebody like Aram Keropian or Haigo Tijan would be more appropriately equipped to answer this sort of a thing, to talk about the history and the development of this book and what happened when it started to be printed. But of course, with any printing, printing is inherently a standardizing factor, right? It's a standardizing element just by virtue of being able to produce these things in the same way. So in so many of them. So yes, everything is laid out, and it's my pleasure. And everything is laid out. So the standardization is for this particular Sharag notes. How these chaz were interpreted may have been differently interpreted from monastery to monastery, or for church to church. There's also I don't know if this is going to show now. It's not going to show, but there's also a Nimonjian version of the notation, which it's very, very simplified, and even the notes that Oren Mechanedian has renotated from the 3-volume Sharag notes follows a different melody because it's following more of a Jerusalem style. So it's going to vary by as a function of the center, the nearest center, most likely. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show you is when we've got this all laid out, I've done a little color coding here. This is kind of how I see it, both in terms of relating the translation to the original, but also looking at the various ways in which there are parallels between verses, between these various tune. So vor, it's starting off with vor, each of them. And then you have Zanarat Bazugas, right? Which is in which case? Anybody?
Accusative?
Exactly. In the accusative case, so something is being done. It's the direct object of a verb. Somebody is doing something to this thing. So the spotless arms are in the accusative case. And we also see this show up, the accusative, as we go down. So that's why I put that in the same color. You can see how it transfers all the way down. So vor, and then you've got immediately this accusative, right? And then things kind of shift a little bit, but you still have the same elements here. You've got the person to whom we're speaking, Christos Astavads, okay? And then you've got the verb, okay? So darad zetzer means what? What do we use that for? The darad zel. Usually.
What's the question?
To distribute, to spread, right?
Darad zel, yes, to distribute is to spread apart. Not to spread apart, but to spread out, right? So he's spreading apart, he's spreading out, but it's also got, we think of darad zel usually with ser as well, with seed, right? This is what you're doing so what I'd like you to do, and feel free to chime in wherever you see some connection with scripture. What sort of words remind you of what in scripture? Okay.
Is this your Red Sea reference? Spreading of the Red Sea?
There might be, yes. Spreading apart the Red Sea, spreading apart Jesus's arms. Absolutely. Absolutely. You have chach in each of them, more or less, or some version. This last one, you have the wood of life. So in these teal, let's call it, we've got different names for the cross. So Nishan Haftutian. So what is that? Nishan Haftutian.
Sign of triumph.
Sign of victory.
Sign of triumph. Yeah, I know it's there. Thank you, Bishop Daniel. But oftentimes we use Nishan just to mean cross. That is the sign. The cross is the sign. Right?
I mean, that's what, in hoc signo, I mean, that's the signal is Nishan.
Absolutely. And then I love this. We've got another verb in here. So what did you do? You spread apart. Okay, we've got the Red Sea reference there for sure. And then we have another, you did something.
Yedur.
Yedur. Yedur.
Yes. Give us.
Yes.
No, gave us. Gave. Because the yeah is the past tense.
You gave us. And I just want to let that sit for a second. We're talking to God. You, second person, singular, you, familiar, you gave this to us. Just pause for a second and appreciate the personal aspect of this relationship. This is what Jesus did for us, but you did this for us. There's no separation. We're all in this together. So just you gave us, and this continues. Yedur mes, again, we're going to repeat it again. What did you give this time? Which means?
The staff of power or scepter. I mean,
yeah, this is another one. I wish the bishop were here to defend himself. But maybe he'll watch the recording and I'll get a call.
Because kavazan we think of as the bishop's crook, the bishop's staff.
Yep, absolutely. And where do we get this idea of a staff also? Where else do we see a staff?
Oh, Moses.
Moses. What did he do with his staff?
Stuck it in the water.
And what should, or maybe I should say, what did God do through Moses' staff?
Everything that Moses did.
Yeah.
The plagues and the spreading of the Red Sea, and
all of these miracles are happening through this rod, through this wood, through this staff. Okay? It's giving life. We're passing through the Red Sea, passing through the sea. Does that remind you of anything, going into water and coming out of water?
baptism.
We use this as a type of baptism as well. We're all over the place. This is how Armenians do exegesis. As we've seen, this is how Armenians love to do sharagats. We love to throw in all of these layers. Gavazan, well, what does Gavazan make me think of? Okay, Gavazan Zorukan, it's the Scepter of Power. And remember, this hymn is exactly contextualized in Moses's his hymn to God. So
can I add something?
Yes, please.
Kavazan, which you said staff. Also, it's called asa for the staff. The bishop's staff is called asa.
We actually use both words. The Gavazan is used liturgically, and there's a different one for the Vartabed as there is for bishop. But the asa we use specifically for the shorter staff that a bishop or higher will carry.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But that's the shorter one without any snakes on top, basically.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. No, good point. But this, and where does the snake come from on the staff? Come on, people.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that amazing?
What?
So we're talking to Christ God, we're talking to God and what he did for us on the cross. And we're giving it these different names. In this third verse, there's something interesting that happens. Oh, you know what? Actually, let me back up. This we also see this very interesting word down here. Where have you ever seen that word before?
Hazug Yerdaradzel.
Yeah, we sort of saw it right up here. Mazugas and Daradzel. But what the hymn writer has done is combine these into one massive compound word. So the unfolding of the arms itself becomes such an important thing that we need to make a word out of it. It's not enough just to talk about you spreading apart your arms, Jesus. We have to talk about the spreading of your arms, right? It's got a different power to it, I think. And then this last one, where we get to Genats by Divan, we have the wood of life, and where we also see another parallel in here. Anybody catch that?
by
Well,
divine.
this is actually a very curious thing,
Mhm.
because in terms of the book of Genesis, there's the tree of life, and it's specifically the word tree, whereas here it's wood.
Yeah. So what is interesting about that? Why do you think the shift from tree to wood?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, but I did notice something in the Kirapar text in Genesis, that the word wood does appear in chapter 1 in verse 12 and verse 29, when it's about the trees producing fruit. So I suspect there may be a connection.
Yeah, and I'll definitely have to explore that. That's an interesting distinction. If it's used for the trees that bear fruit, but it's not used for the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge, tree of
Right.
knowledge of good and evil,
Right.
where we've kind of shifted that. That's interesting. I'll have to talk to Dr. Urban about that too, I'm sure. Very good observation, and very subtle too. Again, like I would imagine that the Armenian hymnist had this in mind. I don't think this would have been lost on them, these sorts of things, if it's that obvious to you.
Those parallels exist all the time. You have like Mary as the second Eve. You have the cross as the second tree of life. There's all those parallels in this. And I think I've seen, I don't know where wood was used as a tree of life, wood of life in something Armenian. The wood of life instead of the word for tree, they use the word wood. I've seen that once somewhere, and I don't remember where.
Yeah, but for some reason, and it may, I don't know, it may sort of reify it a bit more. Like a tree is a tree. Like we have this sort of platonic image of a tree in our heads, right? What did the tree actually look like? But wood, like I can hold it, I can touch it, I can taste it, I can smell it, right? I can tell what sort of tree it came from, right? The wood is much more tangible. I'm wondering if that, I would even suggest that might be what the writers were doing here. They're making this very tangible. Here's this amazing miracle that happened, but it's real for us because of the incarnation.
Maybe eternal or lasting is a better word than tangible. What would?
Perhaps, yeah. It's a little less temporal, you think?
It lasts longer.
And then we have what else now? So the wood of transgressions, right? So we have the wood of life and the wood of transgressions paralleled here. So the wood of life refers to what now?
Cross, obviously.
That's the cross. It's not the tree of life. It's the wood of life. But there's definitely that throwback.
And the wood of transgressions is the tree of knowledge.
And there's in the writings of the church fathers, they'll often comment about the grace of not allowing of Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden and not being allowed to combine their tasting of the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil with the tree of life, which would have made their doom like it would have no end. Right? Because if they would live forever, if they became immortal, right? They were created mortal, because God couldn't say on this day you will surely die if they weren't already created mortal. So there's this, it gets it's very nuanced even in this, I think. The only abbreviation you'll see. Oh yeah.
What about Gena Korzetser there at the end? Gena, he has it restored to life, but is that really restored, or is that like vivified, gave life to? I mean, yeah,
that would also be an appropriate translation. So it's coming from which word? So how are you parsing that, Mark?
Well, it's Gyankan Korzel, right?
Yeah. So Gyank becomes Gen.
Right.
So we'll say like Genas, for example, right?
So
And
vivify, kind of, to give life to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't
I
course?
think, yeah, the restoration is sort of implied in this because of the parallel with the woods. So I'm defending
I
my
see.
bishop a little bit, but you know.
Isn't chords like a deed or an action?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
Yeah.
life, something giving, this action of life or deed of life, giving. So giving of life.
right. And
Well,
Corzel, I
for
mean,
that we would say Getzutsanel. So Getzo or Getzutsanel. So that would be to raise us to life, to give us life. So again, again, there's an emphasis put on it with this words to make sure that we're focusing on the work that is being done in this. Right? It's emphasizing this is he's doing this actual thing. So it could have just been Gyank Barkevyat or Barkevetser or something like this. But that would have been a little bit more repetitive with the Gyanasmer Bahyat, maybe. So Gyanan Gorzetser. And then the only abbreviations you'll see is to tell you to go back up to a previous verse to finish the phrase. So this so goes back up to Sova Visgyanasmer Bahyat. So you might have caught that when we were listening to it as well. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so maybe we could just briefly go through the last few. You can just take a quick look at them and see how there's still some parallels with the Oknagan Havadat Selots. This is another name for the cross. And Oknagan, okay, relief, okay, Bishop Daniel. What would you do with Oknagan?
Helper.
assistant, helper,
Yeah.
Assistant, helper, yeah. Mhm.
the help, the aid of the faithful, kind of. I don't know. That's,
Yep.
I mean, I
And
can't,
that kind of,
I'm not going to
yeah, and
second
it's
guess
unclear whether
Sirpazan,
this
but
is still dative or genitive, right? Could be relief for the faithful, the relief of the faithful. It's going to be the same with the ots plural ending. Gankniav. So again, we've got Gankniav, Barsvatsav, and Yerevi Yevlusavore. So now we've switched into the third person. Notice this. So from this fourth verse on, and then this is, we would have the parkour here in the Ajmer Nish. This last one is really slowed down, so it's got a very different structure, right? We save, so we have Oktagan Havadat Selot, Gankniav, Barsvatsav, and then what's different between the Gankniav, Barsvatsav? Actually, no, let's look at what's happening here. This is huge. Now we're telling a story. The cross was erected. Oops. And then what happened in verse 2?
I was lifted onto the cross. I mean,
God the Creator is lifted onto the cross. So you have the earth. This is so backwards, right? You have the earth, and then the cross, and then God on the cross. Well, God created the earth, so how is God dying? How is this all happening, right? This amazing mystery. So God the Creator is lifted onto the cross. We want to emphasize this. And so Barsvatsav, also, where else do you hear a lifting up onto some piece of wood? Jesus himself mentions this. Let's go back to Moses again. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so shall the Son of Man be lifted up. Right? So we're back to the staff imagery in a totally different part of the narrative of the Exodus. And then finally, I just really want to end on this note, because we look at the Gankniav, the Barsvatsav, both in the aorist, both in the past tense. This is what happened. As Marialis, this happens to us. We are those who have died in sin. by eating the wood. I want to just point this out, the Asmerialis. The us is the closer to us. It's not Asmerialan or Asmerialet. It's not the others who have died in sin by eating the wood. It's us, it's me, who has died in sin by eating of this wood. And finally, let's end with this. The last two words of this hymn before we jump into Party Partslands. The very end of it. This is our hope. And what is our hope? What is hope? If you tuned into Dr. Irvin's lecture the other day, this is not something that is something abstract that is, wishful thinking. This is an imminent reality. This is something that we expect to happen. We are convinced it is going to happen, to the point where it already is happening. In fact, that's the power of hope. And just, in the time that we're living in the world, maybe it's worse than it was before, who knows? But it seems to be like a particular disaster that we're going through with humanity and what we're doing to each other. So it's a very difficult time, especially maybe for us as Armenians going into September and thinking about the anniversary of the war. What do we have to hope for with borders still being hammered out? Okay, and it's not just there, right? It's all over. And so what do we actually hope for? What are we actually looking forward to? What is the reality that we're living in that the people around us without hope are not living in? What is that you can share with others around you? What does that cross mean to you? So we'll end it. The cross is the hope of the faithful. Well, better way, I think.
May I ask a question? In this Sharagan, Jesus is referred to as Christos Asvads instead of Jesus Christos. Was that common? Is that something unusual, or was that how Jesus was addressed when the Sharagan was written?
To my mind, I think that Jesus Christos is very rarely seen in the Sharagans, very rarely heard in the Sharagans. Usually it's just Christos or Christos Astabats. I don't know, Sarkis, if you want to chime in too, if you remember, many instances of Jesus Christos.
Yes, on that, but it really doesn't matter how it's addressed. It is, I believe, it's a reformation of Christos is Asbats. That speaks to me first. So it really doesn't matter who wrote it, what the intention is Christos is Asbats, which we have doubts. That's what it speaks to me. I don't know who wrote it. That's all I get from it.
Yeah, beautiful. And it emphasizes that Jesus as God was on the cross, which is also a theological, people weren't so clear about what was going on with the divinity and humanity. So yes, absolutely, Sarkis is right. It emphasizes the God aspect of Jesus. Like, Jesus is God, right?
And Dinan Sirpazan, the only homily of his I ever heard was specifically on Christos Astvads, and he said, no, I mean, I was a kid, I don't remember that much of it, but what I do remember is that he said no other tradition specifically uses Christos Astvads, Christ God, as in this same way as kind of a label. Nobody does that. Mm-hmm. I assume he was right. I mean, he's Dinan Sirpazan, so I take his word for it.
Yeah, in other traditions, they'll usually insert a possessive form in there. So it's Christ our God, right?
Yeah.
Which is slightly different than Christ God.
Mm-hmm.
But very good observation, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other things that are burning that you noticed? Other connections? Armenian lower connections.
I have a question from the maybe theological or meaning standpoint of the text. So I'm following the juxtaposition that's being made, like between the old maybe mythic forms of power, so like the scepter and the power that gave Moses, and then replaced by the symbolic or real historic image of the cross and the resurrection. So my question is, so that's like two forms of power that were shown, or empowerment. What is the writer of this hymn? What did he experience? What power did he experience that made him write this, or that we're supposed to relate to on a day-to-day basis? If that made any sense.
I think it did. First, let's not forget the sorcerers that were in Pharaoh's court as well. So as you were talking about this, I'm like immediately reminded of this sort of dance that they have to do. Like, well, okay, Moses can do that, but we can do it too. This kind of an attitude, right? And this shows up also in Acts. Anyway, but there's this sort of like the struggle between, okay, the sorcerer that has fake power, let's say, it's physical power that has been, it's not something metaphysical, right? Versus this other metaphysical power in which we believe that is causing this thing to happen. And I think that, I can't speak for the Sharagan writer, of course, but I think that we could imagine what it's like when one finally feels the true grace of God versus a more packaged version of theology that doesn't give that same access to that grace. When we think that we've figured it out, and then it, it's this sort of Pauline almost, going from grace to grace, where we have maybe a sense that is more of a physical, physiological. I'm a psychologist, so I go here. So the more physiological aspect of our psychology versus the more metaphysical or more mystical aspect of who we are. And once we feel the power of that true mystical experience of God's presence, of Jesus's presence, what we experienced before just seems like sorcery, like mesmerism.
It becomes a huis.
Yeah, and it gives me even more hope for that matter. Like, okay, well, if this is what God has done for me so far, let's look at what we have to look forward to. And that's a big point of the Sharagan as well. We'll talk about it constantly in Bishop Daniel, who used to talk about it in his sacramental theology class, this notion of ansud panith. This through your word that cannot be false, basically, through your truthful word. You said you would do this, now we're telling you do this. You said you would do it, so now do it. And then all throughout the Sharagan, we're seeing what you did. Look, you did this. You did this, you did this, you did this. So what do we have to worry about? This is what God did for us. What do we have to worry about?
Well, I think that's a great note to leave off on. Ezras, thank you so much for this really enlightening discussion presentation. And thank you everyone who has been here this whole time. This is the final session, and what a really great way to end it off. I'll officially stop the recording now.